All right, of course, let's continue then with this. The United Nations, in fact, Security Council will convene in an emergency session in the next hour on the escalating tensions in the Middle East after Iran fired about 200 missiles at Israel on Tuesday night. According to Iran's mission to the United Nations, the attack was a legitimate response to terrorist acts of what it called the Zionist regime, which involved the targeting of Iranian nationals and interests while infringing on its national sovereignty. Israel has vowed a painful response. All this as the Israeli foreign minister earlier today announced that UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres was persona non grata in Israel and banned him from entering the country. For more on this and the broader developments in the Middle East, we now speak to our correspondent in New York, Sherwin Bryce-Pease. Sherwin, of course, good afternoon to you. You are monitoring all of these developments as they come in, and this is such an important case. Also, so many implications to this. Let's talk then and start unpacking just some of the things that we are seeing and hearing. So Israel's foreign minister taking to social media to announce that the Secretary General was now banned from entering Israel over his response to the Iranian attack on Israel yesterday. And of course, we've just heard now, in that particular briefing by the Israeli ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon, addressing the media, saying that this was not a defense action by Iran, but a calculated attack, and that Israel will respond and it will be painful.
Yeah, I mean, so many moving parts, right? Let's start with the Israeli Foreign Minister Israel Katz's announcement earlier today that the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, was now regarded as persona non grata and banned from entering Israel due to what they believe is his inadequate response in reaction to Iran's launching of those 180 plus missiles at Israel, in which Iran says is in response to Israel's incursions against various proxies that it supports in the region. Its ground invasion in Lebanon, its earlier assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, who was in Tehran at the time, and I don't believe we had seen a military response from Iran to that assassination some months ago. The Israeli foreign minister taking to social media, Unati, and saying the following: I've declared the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres persona non grata in Israel and banned him from entering the country. Anyone who cannot unequivocally condemn Iran's heinous attack on Israel, as almost every country in the world has done, does not deserve to step foot on Israeli soil. This is the Secretary General who has yet to denounce the massacre and sexual atrocities committed by Hamas murderers on October 7th, nor has he led any efforts to declare them a terrorist organization. Of course, that isn't fully accurate. The Secretary General has condemned Hamas's actions in Israel on October 7th. But this has become a long-standing feud since this very Secretary General in the Security Council, soon after the October 7 attack last year, said that the developments in Israel in relation to that Hamas attack did not, quote, happen in a vacuum. And that initially irritated the Israelis because they didn't want to talk about the broader, long-standing, decades-long conflict between Palestinians and Israel over Palestine's desire for an independent two-state solution. They were unhappy with him then in terms of his response, calling this, sort of not an isolated incident outside of broader developments there, and now again not satisfied with this tweet by the Secretary General yesterday. He said, I condemn the broadening of the Middle East conflict with escalation after escalation. This must stop. We absolutely need a ceasefire. Clearly the Israelis are irritated that this wasn't specifically denouncing Iran, denouncing Iran's proxies. The Secretary General, of course, pushing here for a broad ceasefire, not only in Lebanon. Let's not forget that there is still an ongoing conflict in Gaza. We will be marking a very tragic one-year anniversary later this month in just a few days' time. And so the Israelis here in a long-standing feud with the Secretary General, not happy with how he's pronounced himself on this. And we certainly look forward to his response. He will be addressing, Unati, that Security Council meeting that is just moments away here.
And I mean, just speaking about that Security Council meeting, all eyes on this, of course, and the significance of this particular meeting. Just talk to us then about, what are we likely to hear during this particular meeting? And of course, importantly, which countries then are expected to feature here prominently, Sherwin?
Yeah, so we heard some initial remarks by the Israeli ambassador Danny Danon a short time ago at the Security Council stakeout. He will now go into that Security Council meeting. He will speak later. The Iranian ambassador is expected to speak. The United States ambassador is to speak here, given their role in helping Israel defend itself from these ballistic missiles, the 180 plus launched overnight. We'll also hear from a representative from Lebanon. There's also an ongoing conflict between a ground invasion now that Israel has taken steps into Lebanon, and of course finding a response there by Hezbollah fighters in southern Lebanon. I just want to tell you what the Iranian mission has said, given that we just listened to Israel a short time ago. Iran's mission has tweeted the following: Iran's legal, rational, and legitimate response to the terrorist acts of the Zionist regime, which involve targeting Iranian nationals and interests and infringing upon the national sovereignty of the Islamic Republic of Iran, has been duly carried out. Should the Zionist regime dare to respond or commit further acts of malevolence, a subsequent and crushing response will ensue. Regional states and the Zionist supporters are advised to part ways with the regime. We also heard from President Joe Biden, the US president, yesterday. He said that at his direction, the United States military actively supported the defense of Israel, and they're still assessing the impact. But as we know, there have not been any deaths reported in Israel. But based on what we know, he says the attack appears to have been defeated and ineffective, and this is a testament to Israeli military capability and the U.S. military. And of course, as to reiterate what Danny Danon, the Israeli ambassador, said, they are vowing a response here. They are vowing that this response will be decisive and painful. And so one imagines that some of those messaging from the entities within the council will be reiterated. The United States, Lebanon is there, Iran will speak, but certainly the SG will seek to temper and tamp down the rhetoric. They have been calling now for warning against an escalation that could lead to a regional conflict here, Unati. And so one imagines similar language from the Secretary General. The question really becomes, is anyone really listening to the Secretary General anymore?
And that's a pertinent one, Sherwin, especially as it comes to de-escalation and de-escalating this conflict. But then again, Sherwin, I mean, as we talk about all of these important developments, one also wonders what is to become then in Gaza specifically, because we are still hearing that there's still bombardment happening in Gaza, with Israel still stepping up, it's a particular firing and bombardment in that place. I mean, killing dozens of people just recently. Any word on, ongoing fighting in Gaza specifically, Sherwin, as we look, of course, to this UN Security Council meeting?
Yeah, it's a great point you make, Unati, right? We're distracted now. We're talking about ground incursions into Lebanon. We're talking about Iranian missiles flying into Israel. We're now talking about an Israeli response against Iran, and not so much about the continuing tragedy and humanitarian catastrophe and the ongoing fighting that is happening in the enclave, the largely destroyed enclave of Gaza, where the situation remains acute and really, really desperate. And so the big concern here is as we talk about a broader conflict in the Middle East, how much attention is now going to be focused on a situation that has not been resolved. We have seen the United States pushing for what was an expected and anticipated ceasefire some months ago. It was endorsed, the Biden plan was endorsed by the UN Security Council. But the Israelis and Hamas have simply not been able to reach agreement there. You then saw last week some initial talk between the United States and France about a ceasefire between Hezbollah and Israel in Lebanon. They almost had agreement. The Israeli Prime Minister came and spoke at the General Assembly last week and left without confirming that would necessarily happen. And so lots of talk about ceasefire, lots of pressure about ceasefires, but no ceasefires as yet. Not in Gaza, not in Lebanon, as we only now see escalation. The question is, what can what has been an ineffective Security Council where vetoes run riot on geopolitical situations and arresting those situations. What can this council really do in the absence of the United States putting pressure on Israel to really pull back here, given that the United States is Israel's largest sponsor of military equipment that keeps going into the region, while on the other hand, it's pushing for a ceasefire. So lots of questions here, unclear what the Security Council can do, but certainly to your point, Gaza's war continues. We are no closer to a cessation of hostilities there as we now see escalation in Lebanon, and certainly direct responses now expected between Israel and Iran, with no side indicating that they're ready to step back.
All right, Sherwin, thank you so much for that. Sherwin Bryce-Pease, just keeping us up to speed in as far as what is happening in the Middle East. And of course, as we wait to see what will then be discussed in that United Nations Security Council meeting that will convene in that emergency session a little bit later on. And we will take you live to that particular session as soon as it begins.